Macavity, Macavity, there's no one like Macavity, for he's a fiend in feline shape, a monster of depravity. You may meet him in a by-street, you may see him in the square, but when a crime's discovered, then Macavity's not there.
So wrote the poet T.S. Eliot in 1939 about Macavity, the elusive mystery cat, a shape-shifting fiend, impossible to pin down, the worst kind of villain, a monster of depravity, as slippery, perhaps, as political rhetoric, bullshit in feline form. And here's another poem by T.S. Eliot. It was written 30 years earlier, and it's called The Triumph of Bullshit. It's a less celebrated work, unpublished in his lifetime, and probably, to be honest, with good reason.
Ladies, on whom my attentions have waited, if you consider my merits are small, etiolated, alembicated, orotund, tasteless, fantastical, monotonous, crotchety, constipated, impotent, galimatious, affected, possibly imitated, for Christ's sake, stick it up your ass. Ladies who find my
Some fans of
intentions
T.S. Eliot seem to like it, I don't. To me, it seems kind of vain and stroppy. It's a poem about the fact that no one would publish him. This is at the start of his career because they didn't like the way he wrote. It doesn't help that it specifically attacks, quote, ladies that have influence over him, or at least he thinks that do, including his wife, who he thinks are particularly uninterested in his talents. Eventually, of course, people did publish him. He wrote Macavity, all that other stuff, and very much people liked it. But I don't know, keep some stuff to yourself, I reckon.
For Christ's sake, stick it up your ass.
Anyway, why am I going on about this? Because 1910, in the title of that poem, The Triumph of Bullshit, is the first time we know of that the word bullshit was written down. Eliot no doubt didn't make it up, he heard it being said around him. And no one's quite sure where the word comes from. No one's quite sure of its etymology. One theory is it has the same root as the spectacular English oath bollocks. That being the old French word boll, I don't know, meaning fraud or deceit. But wherever it came from, now we use it all the time. And it is very much a thing. Calling bullshit, talking bullshit, hearing bullshit is everywhere. We live, I fear, in an age of bullshit.
A major Kremlin-backed firm in Russia. You know the way every time Russia's brought up, they say, oh, Trump, what do I have to do with it? And now they're linked. They always like to say, and by the way, how would you like to be?
Now, bullshit isn't lying, because lying is hard. When you lie, you got to say something that clearly ain't true, and people can call you out on it. Bullshit, on the other hand, is easy. You just got to say something. You open your mouth, you flap your lips about, words come out which don't really mean anything. Eventually you close your mouth and the world moves on.
Brexit means Brexit.
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 Our politics is completely and utterly drowning in bullshit. How we talk about climate change is completely and utterly drowning in bullshit. And so, it turns out, are the insides of our heads. Welcome to Your Brain on Climate. I'm Dave, and in this episode we're going to be looking at why it is our society finds it so hard to say what it means about climate change, why there's so much bullshit about, and why, just perhaps, it might be because we don't actually know what we mean in the first place.
Your brain on climate.
So in this episode of Your Brain on Climate, I'm going to be talking to a little bit of a climate literary phenomenon.
I'm a professor at Lancaster University. I'm the founder of Small World Consulting, and I'm the author of several books, including How Bad a Banana is the Carbon Footprint of Everything, and There's No Planet B, and most recently, A Climate of Truth. Is that too much, or is that all right?
This is Mike Berners-Lee, And that new book you mentioned there, A Climate of Truth, out now in all reputable bookshops and at least one large unreputable one, is about how we need to strike out and smash down the bullshit from our politics, from our climate discourse, and yes, indeed, from our brains. And we're going to talk about that in this episode. Now, before we get started, a reminder, this is an entirely listener-supported podcast made entirely by me. I edit it, I produce it, I script it, the lot. And so if you like what I do please consider helping to keep this show on the road with a donation over at patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate. Thanks hugely to Amy, to Alesh and Giovanna who've come on board since the last episode. Thank you, it means so much. And do please, if you can't or won't support the show with a bit of dosh, do at the very least leave it a review over at your podcast medium of choice, in particular Apple Podcasts. Write some words with your hands. And remember, when you hear this owl noise, it donates wisdom. Check out the show notes for more. Right, let's get on with it. And if the name Mike Berners-Lee sounds familiar to you, the guest in this episode, well, yeah, I mean, firstly, look, he's got a famous brother who invented the internet. But he's not unfamous himself, is Mike. In particular, because back in 2010, he wrote a book called How Bad Are Bananas? It's a book that I think pretty much everyone I know who's got even a passing interest in climate change and living sustainably read. It's a pretty heroic attempt to work out the relative carbon footprints of just about everything in our lives, from the embedded cost of solar panels to taking flights to, yes, eating a banana. And the book came along at a time when there was a lot of carbon footprinty type stuff going on back in 2010. This idea was in the ascendancy that enlightened consumption would save the planet. Clever, powerful consumers using their money for good. The Tories had come to power in the UK, and the only positive noises they were really making about climate policy were things that went with the grain of market forces, like empowering consumers to make, quote, greener choices. And with awareness of climate change rising, people did want to know how they could make the most difference in their lives. So this sort of carbon footprinting, what's the greenest way to live stuff was big. Now, as you can tell probably by my tone, I've always found the idea that we'll save the planet by shopping greener a bit, let's just say, partial. But that's not to have a go at Mike, because his book was useful and it was a fascinating dip into what really goes into the production of everyday stuff and the sometimes surprising energy bound up in apparently benign products. Bananas, by the way, says Mike, have a pretty low carbon footprint, even given the long distances you've got to count in for them travelling to the UK or places like that. Much lower than, e.g., meat. Anyway, look, 15 years later now, enlightened consumerism does appear to have spectacularly failed to save the planet, and we are still very much in trouble. And Mike's books since Bananas have looked at more structural things, like how to keep oil in the ground, and in this book, the culture of our political debate and the nature of human brains. So I wonder, how does Mike reflect on that Bananas book now, 15 years on?
Well, back in 2010 or even 29, when I was writing that book, the kind of climate change, as we called it then, as opposed to climate crisis or climate breakdown, was, it was this very serious thing, but it looked as if we were all starting to wake up to it, and there was a job to be done just getting it into the public discourse better and helping to provide a kind of basic understanding of how carbon worked in our lives and in the world, what kind of things had big carbon footprints and why, and what kind of things were trivial. And that felt like a really useful thing to do. So then 10 years down the line, I found people were still buying that book. So I had to rewrite it completely. I had to redo the numbers. I had to redo the tone, because we were now obviously in this flat out climate emergency, and there were new things to write about, such as, AI and stuff. So, and that was harder work than writing the original book. But, it's clear that whilst it was important to get this everyday understanding of carbon emissions out into the public, it's become painfully apparent that a bit more is needed than that if we're actually going to get some change. So, I still feel okay about Bananas. It's a sort of an entry-level book, and the new edition of it does contain quite a lot of chat about the systemic change that we're needed, and the bigger part that all of us can play than just cutting our carbon footprints. But I suppose the journey from writing Bananas was that after that, it became clear that climate change had to be looked at in a systemic way. So with Duncan Clark, I wrote The Burning Question, which was just taking a big picture look at climate and pointing out some very simple things like the carbon emissions curve since 1860 or so had been mathematically exponentially growing up an average of 1.8% a year. And that told us so much about the dynamics of how carbon was working and how and why efficiency improvements weren't helping us and so on. And saying this blatantly obvious thing that nobody was talking about at the time, that we need to leave the fossil fuel in the ground. I mean, duh. And then the next book, There's No Planet B, I wrote because it became clear that it wasn't just climate. This is a polycrisis we're in, and you have to see it as one symptom of something much bigger that we're in now. Our arrival in the Anthropocene, this age in which we're so powerful that we need a new way of interacting with the planet that we're on, and that entails new ways of thinking about how we do life, how we do economics, politics, and everything.
Many species to go extinct simultaneously.
The evidence is that unless immediate action is taken, this crisis has grave impacts for us all.
We're not just losing nice things.
What I mean by
to look at.
polycrisis is that it's not just climate that's in crisis. There's a collection of environmental issues, the rising plastics, hemorrhaging biodiversity, rising population, increasing disease threats from different areas, food insecurity. So that's polycrisis. What I mean by metacrisis is that beyond the polycrisis, there's a crisis going on at a deeper level. In other words, we can't fix a polycrisis just by heading off all those symptoms. We have to get under the skin of it, into the deeper levels of what's going on, into our politics and our economics and the way we do money, our relationship with technology, and the levels of inequality and the way we think about education. And even deeper than that, there are some basic values that we've got to sort out. So this book is saying, look, the reality is we're not getting anywhere. It's getting very urgent that we do start to get somewhere. If we want to begin getting somewhere, we're going to need to stand back and see the problem in a new way, right? We're going to need, if what you're doing is not working year after year after year, those of us who actually want to see change for the first time have to stand right back and say, right, what's the bigger picture? What is going on here that we haven't spotted yet? And then we also have to get underneath the skin of the problem further to ask, what are the reasons behind the reasons why none of these things have done anything for us? So that's what this book is about. It's going through that exercise. And when you do that, where I come to is I say, look, if we want to change the dial on this, the most critical lever for all of us is to raise the standards of honesty in our society. And it doesn't actually matter what you care about the most, whether it's climate or food security or biodiversity or inequality or almost whatever it is that you care about. We can't get anywhere on any environmental or social issue that matters unless we can raise the standards of honesty in our politics, media, and business. So that's what this book is about.
So, as Mike said, his new book, A Climate of Truth, is all about honesty and standing up to bullshit. And as I said at the start, bullshit is a different thing, a subtly different thing, but a different thing nonetheless from lying. It's something a bit different. Just like Macavity, the mystery cat, it's a bit more evasive and harder to pin down. Bullshit is about saying anything without caring whether it's true or not, just to impress people, banging on to look good. One of the best things ever written about bullshit was in 1986 by a guy called Harry Frankfurt, an American philosopher. And he defined it like this.
The bullshitter is neither on the side of the true nor on the side of the false. His eye is not on the facts at all, as the eyes of the honest man and of the liar are, except insofar as they may be pertinent to his interest in getting away with what he says. He does not care whether the things he says describe reality correctly. He just picks them out or makes them up to suit his purpose.
Define what you mean, I guess, by honesty, by truth, and by lying. What do you mean when you talk about those things?
So, honesty is giving other people the best view of reality as you understand it, that you are practically able to do. So it means not misleading other people in any way at all. So this is a lot more than just not lying. This is about not misrepresenting information. It's about not misdirecting attention. It's about not finding loopholes. It's not implying things that you know aren't true. It's not bias selection of evidence. It's not burying bad news. It's being absolutely frank and candid. That's what honesty means. And the truth is, it's something we can't always perfectly understand. In fact, we often don't. Around climate and food science and so on, we do not have perfect understanding. So it is about helping other people to see reality as best you understand it. That's what honesty means. Yeah.
And is there an element of being honest with yourself then about that? Because so much of this, I mean, the last episode of the show that I did, which listeners might just listen to, was about kind of cognitive dissonance and the problems perhaps that we have with the scale of all of this stuff. So do we have to start with looking this stuff in the face?
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely part of it. In a way, there's a parallel journey internally and externally. We change the world by changing ourselves from within. We be the change you want to see and all the rest of it. And I do write there is one chapter on this about sort of inner development. I write it with hesitancy because who am I to write about this kind of stuff? But, there's so many reasons why we need it. For a start, we need to raise our own standard of critical thinking, all of us. I mean, we need to encourage and enable each other to do this. But in order to be good at understanding what's fact and what's fiction, we need to understand our own emotional reaction to the information we get, because otherwise we are liable to be driven by our emotional response. We hear a piece of news and we don't like the sound of it and it makes us uncomfortable. And if we're not careful, that will cause us to switch off, reject it, find some reason why it's not true. Equally, if somebody tells us a narrative which could be absolute bullshit, if it's enticing and it makes us feel good in the here and now, we are likely, if we're not sufficiently discerning of our own, if we're reflective of our own minds, we're likely to run with that attractive feel-good narrative, but in the long run, that's at our cost. So that's why we need this kind of, we need a level of introspection and kind of inner wisdom.
So not only is bullshit not lying, I think it's important to remember that sometimes bullshitters get things right, but only in the same way as a chimpanzee throwing darts around a pub with its eyes shut will occasionally hit the dartboard. The philosopher Quassam Cassim uses the majestic phrase epistemic insouciance. How about that, which I like a great deal, epistemic insouciance. The state of simply not caring what the facts are, talking first, worrying about truth later. Now, I'm willing to bet that right now, when you're thinking about bullshit and bullshitters and people who talk first and worry about the truth later, there's one particular person, particularly if they're based in Britain, who you might be calling to mind. The grand high prince of modern bullshit. Someone who in recent years elevated the art of epistemic insouciance to a new plateau.
You asked about my character, actually. I'm not avoiding the question. You asked a very direct question about my character. And what I'm telling you... Well, let me put it another way. Let me put it another way. Does a person's private life have any bearing on their abilities to do the job as Prime Minister? Promises, and you look at my determination to deliver for people who vote for me. When I say I will do X, I don't deliver X.
And it's not a party political book. It absolutely needs to transcend party politics. But as I was writing it, in the UK, there was one party in particular that was just being so routinely dishonest that it provided just such a rich source of examples. And Boris was one of them. And what I mean by bullshit is any narrative that doesn't care which bits of it are true and which bits of it are false. It is just simply designed to persuade. And artful bullshit, the trouble is that the bits that are true can trick you into thinking, oh, this is a plausible character, this argument makes sense. And then the bits that are completely fake is just kind of slipped into the cracks while your guard's down. And of course, Boris told, he did say some things that were true, but the point is he said some things, many things, that were flat out not true. In fact, the journalist Peter Oborne meticulously catalogued by the 100-load his lies on a website called borisjohnsonlies.co.uk, which is now politicallies.com, because he expanded it out to cover other lying politicians.
Presenter Dave cutting in here to point out that web address should actually be political-lies.co.uk. I mean, you'll find it if you Google it anyway. But there really is some excellent stuff on there, bullshit, mistruths, and general balderdash from a slew of UK politicians, of which our Boris is definitely the star.
This is a pretty typical question that sums up the mood on Mumsnet, I'd say, from a user who goes by the name of Tim Booth's Eyes. She'd like to know, why should we believe anything you say when it has been proven you're a habitual liar?
Well, first of all, don't agree with the conclusion that Tim, the questioner asked, but or the premise of the question. But
weirdly, I have a sort of respect. I mean, I don't respect it, right? But I have a sort of respect for the kind of brilliantly put together bullshit that someone like a Boris is capable of doing. Like when you, and I mean that from a sort of like just seeing a master at work kind of point of view, because there's a lot of it about, and a large part, I think, of what you're describing sounds like politics rather than Boris in particular. Like a lot of politics seems to be about kind of, constructing a fiction, right?
Let's be absolutely clear about this. It's politics as we have allowed it to descend into. It's not politics as it needs to be, and it's not politics as we can get away with going forwards, right? So, I mean, yes, it's awesome to look at somebody who can say things that are not true to the public without flinching. You and I probably would, I would want to just crawl under the carpet if I was saying some of the things that some politicians say, but that's not a skill, it's an anti-skill, right? And in some ways, some of the academic training, educational training that some politicians have had, develops that art. I spoke at the Oxford Union a little while ago, and I told them that that chamber was a training ground for some terrible politics, right? The idea that you try and win a debate, whether or not your argument is wrong or not, whatever bullshit you have to do to win the debate on the night. I mean, that's so unhealthy. And we shouldn't be doing our debates in that manner. And it's training people up to behave in the House of Commons in a way that is just unfit for the kind of decision making that we need in today's world.
Order.
So we talked about this guy, Harry Frankfurt, quite a few times today, and his 1986 paper on bullshit, which he wrote because he said, bullshit is a greater enemy of truth than lies are. And I think he's right, because bullshit is so easy to do. It's much easier to flim-flam some words no one really pulls you up on than it is to outright lie and have to back it up. And it's much easier to bullshit than to refute that bullshit. And this is how, like, misinformation works, isn't it? Misinformation, not disinformation. Disinformation is deliberate lying, like when people accuse climate scientists of faking data, which they aren't, or car companies say their cars are low emission, when in fact they aren't. Yes, Volkswagen, we still remember. No, misinformation is viral bullshit. It's the sharing of information that people sort of believe to be true, probably, but they aren't really minded to pay close attention to it to find out. You just share it anyway because you like sharing stuff. One brilliant recent study said that you're going to be far more likely to click and share information, no matter what your politics, without checking its provenance, if you think that to do so makes you or your side of the argument look good. That's how this stuff spreads on both sides of any given debate. I see something, it backs up something that me or people like me think, and so I share it without really reading the thing. And I'm certainly guilty of that, triumphantly sharing some headline that validates something I already thought without bothering to actually check it. As Harry Frankfurt says, the problem with bullshit isn't that people get things wrong, but they don't even try to get things right. No wonder people are giving up on politics, which they see as a complete slew of the stuff. So I asked Mike, what on earth is to be done?
All right. So we need to create an environment in which there's a real price to be paid for playing fast and loose with the truth. Right. And the reason why we need a very high price for it is because it's so easy to peddle something dishonest, and it's so hard to put it back in the bag. I mean, one of the examples I give in the book is Grant Shapps going on Radio 4 saying, "Oh yeah, we need to have new oil and gas licenses for the North Sea because otherwise our energy prices will go through the roof." And that's just not true, and he must surely know that's not true. Our energy prices are determined by global commodity prices, have barely anything to do with what we do in the North Sea, right? So it's a piece of plausible sounding absolute nonsense, right? But it took him 10 minutes to say that on the radio, whereas it took Carbon Brief academics probably days to write their careful paper explaining why that was a load of rubbish. But even after they'd done that, they haven't got it out to the millions of people who listen to the Radio 4 program. So it's so much harder to put dishonesty back in the box than it is to spin it in the first place. So given that that's the case, how can we create a climate of truth? So there's a simple little mathematical equation in the book that just says the price for being found out to have been deliberately deceitful needs to be greater than the perceived benefit of getting away with it times the ratio of how much effort it takes to peddle the dishonesty in the first place. Sorry, the ratio of how hard it is to expose the dishonesty divided by how much effort it takes to peddle it in the first place, and which is a very high ratio. Right. So how do we create this very high price? Well, we need to treat deceit in politics as we treat abuse, right? So if a media presenter today is found to have groped a colleague, that's it. It's the end of their career because we have decided as a society that that is disgusting and we're not having it. Not only that, but if you are a colleague of that presenter and you are found to have stayed quiet in the knowledge that they had done that, then that's probably the end of your career too, right? And we can have that standard because if somebody deceives you deliberately, a politician deliberately deceives you on a matter of policy, that tells you can't trust them on that particular area. It tells you can't trust them on anything at all, ever, unless they have some quite rare experience that makes them suddenly decide they've got to become honest. And it also tells you can't trust any of their colleagues who've stayed quiet in the knowledge that they were peddling deceit. And that, when you applied it to the last government, and to repeat, this is not a party political book, but when you did apply it to the last government, there was not a single MP left standing.
Because of the culture of how politics is done.
Because they all put up with it, right? They all put up with being in a party where there was routine deceit. it is time for not just a reset, but actually to get higher standards than we've ever had before. Why do we need higher standards than we've ever had before? Because here is humanity in the Anthropocene facing a polycrisis, actually a meta-crisis, because it's going on at a deeper level than just a polycrisis, of highly complex issues. And we're going to be in a lot of trouble if we don't start finding a way of dealing with it. And it demands a quality of decision-making. It demands the highest quality of decision-making that we can possibly have. And if somebody anywhere in the system is being deceitful, obscuring reality, then it's just a massive spanner in the works. And when I look at all the bad decisions on climate, for example, they have dishonesty at their roots. Detailed questions like, should we have a new coal mine in the northwest of England on my doorstep? Or should we open up new oil and gas fields and so on? The arguments behind that in favor of those things are not poor judgment. They are deceitful. They sound plausible when you just air them on the radio, but when you pick into, I picked in detail into all the coal mine arguments, and I found that they were so flawed that it was pretty clear cut to me that the people who were putting it out there knew they were a load of nonsense. That coal mine was never going to be carbon neutral. It wasn't needed for the steel industry. The coal wasn't even fit for the steel industry, most of it. The steel industry wasn't interested in it. The idea that opening up that coal mine would lead to other coal mines around the world closing down so that no more coal would be produced flew in the face of all economic theory. It was all a complete load of nonsense. And yet so much effort. So many great people I know have had to waste so much time fending off that argument just through a little bit of easy to spread deceit. I mean, we've got to get that out of the decision-making mix.
Your brain on climate.
Welcome back to Your Brain on Climate. I'm Dave. And in this episode, I'm talking to Mike Berners-Lee all about bullshit. Bullshit in our politics, in our public debate, and in how we talk about really important stuff, like saving the planet and climate and that. Now, please indulge me for a minute or two, because I've spent a lot of my life kind of horrified, kind of fascinated by the sheer amount of bullshit when it comes to talking about climate change and stuff like that. The world of what I'm going to call, like through seriously gritted teeth, sustainability is absolutely and completely and utterly drowning in bullshit. I'm using gritted teeth because that word, sustainability, as used often, is bullshit. Like, its literal meaning, the only way that using it actually makes sense is you can keep on doing the thing forever. The opposite of something sustainable is something unsustainable. But you will hear the word sustainable used to talk about stuff that you just cannot keep on doing forever on a planet what is suffering, like sustainable coal or sustainable diesel or sustainable fast fashion or any of the rest of the ways that this word is cruelly deployed. If you're doing that, then you are bullshitting, and it happens a lot. This is a field that is drowning in words, in language that obfuscates and confuses, that appears to be saying something without saying it. Vast amounts of words, great long reports, saying something in small print over many pages, which isn't really saying very much at all. Usually well-meaning, but often absolutely pointless.
Disease, a cure. Beyond pain, joy, effort, reward, winter, summer, beyond darkness, light, beyond petroleum, BP.
I found a study from 2022 by a guy called Julian Kirchherr, who says that half of all the sustainability articles published, he reckons, might be what he calls scholarly bullshit, which he describes as articles that engage with the latest buzzword like circular economy but contribute nothing to the scholarly body of knowledge on the topic. And he's right. I know wherever I speak on this. For 8 years, I co-hosted a podcast called Sustainababble, all about egregious eco-guff. And this type of guff, in how people talk about sustainability and stuff like that, I think manifests in two ways. Firstly, there are people who know that they are bullshitting, like companies that are claiming to be green when they aren't, or doing something green over here but something not green over here, and want you to look at the first one. But then there's people who are not deliberately bullshitting, but they kind of can't help it. Because this is the way you talk about this stuff. They're trying to be taken seriously in a community that's utterly inured to this kind of language. Words that don't really mean anything, terms that are vague, and you can't get hold of them. They might be mouthpieces for organisations who, like, for whatever reason, can't quite tell it like it is. Like maybe an NGO that wants to call politicians planet-destroying bastards but worries about losing access. Or a think tank that wants to appear sober and reasonable and so uses the kind of language about climate change that it thinks sober and reasonable people use, not language that really talks about what's going on. And like, full disclosure, I have done a lot of this stuff and I've been engaged in it, found it confusing, and it sucks. More charitably, this stuff is often complex. Look, it can be hard to find the right words for things like planetary systems, the trade-offs, the risks that doing something about all of this stuff entails. We come up with words that try to capture this snappily, like sustainability or net zero or the circular economy, but they fundamentally mean different things to different people. In fact, precisely because they mean different things to different people, they allow everyone to agree they're important and we should work on them. They get people around the table and so they're useful for that. But the downside is, because they mean different things to different people, when we talk about them, we can fudge what we mean so as not to upset anyone. I can say I'm doing something sustainably, you can say you're doing something sustainably, and we both mean different things, we both know we mean different things, but we just kind of all get on with it. Anyway, look, tangent over, but this stuff is endemic. And the problem is I'm not the only one who's a little bit cynical and tired of it all. And one of the things actually that characterises how people feel about politics is a deep kind of cynicism and distrust and apathy that is, people are sort of giving up on, not just on politics as a thing that can improve their lives, but politicians as ever telling them the truth. And there's been, there's lots of reasons for that, but that's where we are. So in a way, I think people are kind of halfway with you, right? In that there is a kind of, an innate cynicism. But the problem, I guess, is that it's so deeply entrenched now that it would be hard for a politician to cut through to anyone, honest or not, right?
Well, we've allowed some bogus narratives to gain traction. One of them is that everybody lies. It's just how politics is done. It's like, it's the way the world works, right? Well, there may have always been a degree of dishonesty in politics since year dot in most places, but it's not inevitable, and we can't function with it going forwards. All right. The good news I've got for people listening to this is that there's something we can do about it, right? The people who peddle the idea that lying is just part of life, they're the people who lie the most, right? Because it normalizes their behavior and makes them feel okay about it. It's not something we have to have. And the other bogus narrative that's going around is that we're all kind of greedy and we're all just looking after our own self-interest, and that's what matters to us most. And it's the harnessing of human greed that has allowed humans to achieve everything they've achieved. Oh, there's so much wrong with that, but the evidence is against them, right? We're not fundamentally out for our self-interest like that, although it's a variable, right? We can choose the values that we need in order to thrive. We can cultivate them through our own deliberate effort, and that's what we got to do now. So we've got to make it, we've made it culturally normal that you can't go around groping people in the street. Well, we need to make it culturally normal that you can't go telling bogus narratives, whether you're in the media, whether you're in business, or whether you're a politician.
Would you put people who lie, politicians or the media, in prison? Do you think there's an argument for something that kind of full on?
I'm going to put a caveat here, which is I'm going to keep people's personal lives out of this. But I I do think on matters of policy, absolutely, that should be illegal. How should we treat people who are dishonest? Well, one of the things I know it's a very interesting question. One of the things I advocate in this book is universal respect for all people, right? And that really does mean all people, whether they're in Gaza or Israel, Ukraine, Russia, however they've behaved. So even Trump and Boris and all the rest of it, right? So, but they're unfit for the job that they're in. And I'm sure in the right job, Boris Johnson could be great. I wouldn't mind seeing him on stage. I'm sure he could be a good comedian. He could be interesting. I've even heard that he was a good editor at The Spectator from somebody who's now extremely critical of him, right? So there are some things, he has some qualities, but he was in the wrong job and we needed him out. So I think people who don't have the qualities that we need, we just need to make sure that they're out of the system. And it's not just honesty, actually. Related to honesty is empathy. We need our politicians to care about other people, right? And actually that needs to be a global empathy. I talk about this a little bit in the book. With Globalized now, there are 8.2 billion of us or whatever on the planet. And we will sink or swim together. And so we need to respect each other because we need to be all on the same side. Our sense of tribe has to be global now. It has to be. It's okay to still have still cheer for your local football team and still feel some national pride at the Olympics possibly. But our fundamental sense of tribe has to be the global tribe. And nothing else will do. And we need to make sure that our politicians have that sense. And that's what we should be thinking about as well at the voting booth. I will say something I think is really important here, which is that if you find yourself in a situation where none of the candidates are fit for purpose, it is really, really important to vote for the least unfit.
So you don't advocate giving up on the whole process?
No, because if we all vote for the least unfit, we'll raise the bar.
Slim pickings, isn't it? Bloody hell. Speaking of people who are in the wrong job at the wrong time, the bullshit about climate change has been taken to a whole new level with the election, again, of the Mango Mussolini, Donald J. Trump, who is bullshitting not just about coal mines and things like that, but about climate science itself. And not just him doing it, but the entire artifact of his government. How do you, as someone who has just written a book about how important it is not to be an arsehole, deal with the fact that the world's richest country is currently being governed by one? It must make you despair at the moment.
Well, it's really, really not good. In fact, when he was elected, I went through the draft of the book, recalibrating the level of optimism in response to his election. But was
there originally a chapter sort of towards the end going, you know what, I think it's going to be fine, and we took that chapter out?
Well, I hoped he wouldn't get in. But I think on both sides of the Atlantic, to varying degrees, we've been having a little experiment with post-truth. We've been asking the question collectively, this boring truth stuff, does it really matter as much as we've always kind of said? Or can we get away with, it's fun. In the UK, it was fun to vote for enticing narratives from, a guy with an interesting haircut. It just felt good for a lot of people to do that. And now we're finding that, there are consequences to that, and it's not so fun. And actually, there's a reason why that boring truth stuff really matters, and it really, really matters. I talk about a whole taxonomy of deceit in the book, and in a way, the Democrats, we've got into this situation because the Democrats are also guilty of some of that taxonomy of deceit, in the sense that propping up a whole kind of system. The American dream is a bit of a lie, right? Because it's experienced and lived by such a tiny proportion of the population. So, no wonder there's this kind of distrust. But the message I've got in my book is that we don't have to have that, right? We can hang on to this value. We can build this value. It involves challenging the people around us as well, our colleagues, our friends, our family. If your family is reading a paper that's owned by a media empire that has got a track record of swinging elections and making the public believe things that are not actually right, and sometimes doing things like hacking phones and so on. If you're reading that paper, then that's a problem. And we need to be brave enough to challenge it, even if it's a bit uncomfortable.
When do you bullshit? Because I bet you do. When do you say something to look good or to preserve your self-image without thinking about what you really think? Perhaps it's in a high-pressure work meeting when you haven't said anything for a while and you feel like you need to pipe up. I've definitely caught myself in those kind of situations, speaking words, in the process of speaking words, just to look like I'm someone who speaks words, and feeling strangely untethered from the words themselves, kind of floating above them, observing them coming out of my mouth, marvelling at my own bullshit. Now, psychologists have found that you're much more likely to bullshit when you feel that kind of social pressure to provide an opinion, and when you don't think you'll face any particular comeback for your bullshit. If you want proof of this, go and have a look at the stinking cesspit of bullshit that is Twitter, or X, a website where you can be simultaneously pretty anonymous behind a pseudonym or an online persona, so there's no particular comeback to you for stuff that you say, and where you get lots of lovely dopamine hits every time you say something that someone else likes. And so that incentivizes you to say stuff, even when it might be better if you didn't. So, living life with that honesty that Mike calls for has to start, I guess, with not saying things, when to say them is just adding words to the word pile, just to make us feel better. But what about the bullshit inside our heads? Now, in the last episode of Your Brain on Climate, I spoke to Sarah Stein-Lebrano about cognitive dissonance, about the human brain's ability to delude the hell out of ourselves. Now, we can stare the facts of something like the climate crisis in the face, but if to do so threatens our own self-image of us as a good person, we're very, very good at telling ourselves any old stream of nonsense just to make those feelings of guilt about doing something like flying go away. It made me think, if what bullshit is like saying some stuff so that you can get by in the world and project a robust image of yourself and persuade people you are great, then we kind of do that to ourselves as well. What we do to ourselves on climate change is probably more bullshit than lies. Mike says this in his book.
Sometimes the accomplished bullshit artist initiates an enchanting narrative that spreads through society. Some people propagate it with deep cynicism, but for the most part, wishful thinking is all it needs. The temptation to deceive ourselves can be as strong as the temptation to deceive others.
Back in episode 19, I spoke to the philosopher and activist Rupert Reed. That's an episode about honesty as well, and there's lots of crossovers, so if you like this, go back and have a listen to that. Rupert says that at the heart of being honest in the world is being honest in our own heads. And that's got to start with overcoming our own tendency not to want to look at things. We need to face up to how bad things really are. This is hard, of course, but Rupert says it's worth it.
The essence of what, as you know, Dave, I passionately believe that the way to get to a place where we're actually okay again is to admit the very, very difficult feelings which will arise when you actually allow yourselves, as most of us, and I don't exclude myself here, most of the time don't do, when you actually allow yourselves to face up to climate reality. And the reality is very difficult. So a few little headlines as we started off by saying.
So here's what Mike has to say.
Well, it's to try to be as reflective as we can on why we hold the beliefs that we hold and what our emotional reaction is to the news that we hear, in order that we can better understand our own biases and inclinations, in order that they don't have to rule our lives so much. And that takes us out of the grip of anybody who might try to manipulate us in different ways. And that, there is manipulation coming at us from all angles now, right? So, there's a huge advertising industries trying to persuade us that we won't be happy unless we've got more stuff, or we fly to the Caribbean for our holidays, or we have a new SUV, or and all that stuff. And it's not, it's not in our interests. And when you turn on The radio in the morning, almost whatever channel you turn on, you will, although you might hear a little bit about climate or a little bit about nature or something, you will pick up an overarching kind of flavor that says the appropriate response is to carry on as normal. And it's just not. You know, I give talks to literally thousands and thousands of people in business contexts. And I spell out what I think is going on in the poly crisis. And I ask them, put up your hand if you think I've got this about right, or if you think I've exaggerated it, or if you think I've underestimated it. And every single time, there are more people in the room who think I have underestimated how serious things are than I think I've exaggerated it. I barely get anybody who thinks I've exaggerated it. And, you know, so we all get it. We get it. And yet we're living as if we don't get it. And we've got to snap out of that.
Your brain on climate.
Now, look, we're nearly done with the chat with Mike, and it's been really interesting. But in a spirit of not bullshitting either you or myself, I think I need to say at this point, I'm not 100% convinced about some bits of Mike's argument. I think there can be a tendency sometimes to say that what needs to happen to save the planet is everyone needs to stop behaving in a particular way, start behaving in a different way, and when we do that, everything will be okay. That is, of course, correct, logically speaking. Like, if everyone stopped using single-use plastic tomorrow, there would no longer be a single-use plastic problem. And if everyone suddenly did wake up to the better, more truthful angels of our nature and adopted Mike's position of being honest at all costs, then yeah, that would be a curious society to live in. But I can see how that would change politics and lead to a politics perhaps more able to cope with the gravity of ecological collapse and all the rest of it. If everybody was honest, I can see that would change things. But, like, we're not, are we? That's not how humans work. That's not how bullshit works, come to that. Bullshit exists for a reason. We are confused little bags of water. We're driven by the rampaging disquiet in our heads, our need to fit in, just as much as we are about nobly pursuing objective truth in the world at all costs. We probably can't really handle the truth on a day-to-day sort of level, or we would never get shit done. We make stuff up because we want status, because we want to fit in, or we want to make ourselves feel or look interesting. I'd love to think you could make that go away, but I just don't think simply asking for it to happen is enough. Now, that's not really having a go at Mike, because I don't think it invalidates the idea that this could all be better, and it certainly doesn't invalidate Mike's plea for better rules to protect our politics from bullshit and lies. I completely agree with him. If a political liar is exposed as telling political lies, they should go to prison. But I don't know if I think that politics, or the ways that humans interact with each other, is going to get any less bullshitty anytime soon, no matter how much that might seem like a good idea, not least because, like, we haven't said anything so far at all about AI and the thing that's going to do, the turbocharging of bullshit. Like, look at what ChatGPT and things like that are, or like the automated summaries at the top of Google searches. Like, they are bullshit. They're bullshit by the definition of, like, you ask ChatGPT a question and it gives you an answer, even if it doesn't really know the answer. It just says some stuff. It wants to please you in response to your prompt. And it doesn't actually care, really, about whether it's right or not. It doesn't actually even really have a sense of right. It's just cheery, and it's slightly smug, and it wants to help you and to be liked, like that toaster in Red Dwarf.
Talkie Toaster, your chirpy breakfast companion. Talkie's the name, toasting's the game. Anyone like any toast?
But look, obviously more honesty is a good thing, less bullshit is desirable, and we all have a duty to try to see when we're doing it and try to help other people not doing it. And in particular, honesty with ourselves is about, you know, not just what's going on, but how it makes us feel and telling our truth. And I think particularly right now, with like climate change being so grave and politics appearing to make it harder than ever to make progress, it's more important than ever, I think, that the people who really care about it say so. Because there's plenty of people who are quite happy to bullshit on that it isn't.
We all have psychological strategies for dealing with bad news. And I write about this a bit in the book. I talk about a kind of change transition curve, the psychology of how very often our first reaction is to deny it, and then we get angry about it, and then maybe we try and bargain with the problem and try and get it to agree to be less than it really is, and then we get depressed about it, and then if we can come through all of that, we might get to the point where we accept the problem on the terms that it needs to be accepted, and it's at that point for the first time that we're able to start taking meaningful constructive action. And if you look at the whole of humanity now, we're strung out along that grief transition curve, it's sometimes described as. And, that's where a lot of denial comes from. A lot of denial comes from the sheer fending off of bad news, discomfort with it. So what I would say to those people is that the trouble is that it plays on your mind when you know deep down that you're fighting something off. It's not a good feeling. It's not a route to psychological happiness. Actually, the route to psychological health is to stare this problem in the face as best as possible. And I would encourage people to be reflective on this and just notice how they react to it and come to terms with their own reaction. And I would say, there's still plenty to be cheerful about in life. There are some dark clouds brewing. However, there's still plenty to be cheerful about and grateful about in life. And it's better to enjoy those things with a sort of clearer view of the situation we're in, I think.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Your Brain on Climate with Mike Berners-Lee. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to support this one-man operation, that would be very kind of you, and a few quid goes a long way. You can go to patreon.com/yourbrainonclimate to donate. Best to use the website, not the Patreon iOS app, unless you really like giving Apple a big cut of things. Or drop me an email to hello@yourbrainonclimate.com if you'd like to donate some other way, or generally want to give me any feedback on the show. Please, 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 please rate, share, review the podcast. You've got no idea how much help that is for a small indie cast like me. And thanks, as always, to the majestic, the wonderful Ruth Everett for the voices. That's all for now. I'll be back soon. And until then, look after yourselves. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye-bye-bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.